Applied research process steps. Research process steps. We know that research process is about ensuring research is completed effectively and appropriately. But how can you make sure you don't forget any important aspect of the research process? So, there are certain key steps. First is identify the purpose of the research question, design a research plan, collect the required data, interpret the collected data, and last, present the research findings. So, by following all these five ordered research process steps, you will ensure your research is complete. So, we will further deeply understand all these steps. We will dwell deeper into each steps of the research process that are listed below. We will also look at some tips of how to approach writing your research project in this PPT. As we mentioned, the first point is identifying the purpose or objective or a problem. So before researching a topic, you need to know what information you want to find out. There's no point simply Googling Ernest Hemingway. Who is he? A great American author. He created a signature style Great American author. He created a signature writing style with short, simple prose, but layered characters and plot lines. So if you search, you will definitely get it, but you have to understand what you want to find out. So when what you are specifically interested in is the effects of the narrative perspective used in his novel For Whom the Bell Tolls. Identifying your brief or devising a research question is a vital to ensure you are looking for the right information and not being too broad. This will also help you find information that is relevant and helpful for your investigation. So a research question here is targeted in specific question that sets the biases of your research and also sets the basis of your research. How has the development of technology impacted our language use? This is their question. So let's just talk into the hypothesis. The hypothesis is an idea or a proposition used as a basis of research, which sets the foundation for further investigation. Hypothesis is an idea that is not necessarily assumed to be correct, but is simply used as basis of your further exploration. For example, younger people are more likely to use acronyms when communicating, use social media than older people. So this is the base of your hypothesis. Let's look into the detail. So not all types of research will require a hypothesis. For example, literature-based research. However, things like scientific research or other kinds, primary research where you are contributing your own ideas to the field, may require one of the hypotheses. Next is design a research plan. It's now time to design your research plan. Before you begin your research, you need to consider the type of research you'll undertake, that is qualitative or quantitative, and whether you'll create new research primary or conduct research by analyzing the research for others, that is secondary research. You must also decide what types of source you might use while designing a research plan. Third is collection of the required data. So data collection process can be split into two subcategories. Firstly, you must collect secondary research data by conducting your own research based on primary and secondary sources that already exist. These existing sources could include journal articles, news articles, textbooks, and literary books. So, in some cases, your data collection may end here and you could move on to interpreting your findings. However, you may need to conduct primary research as well. So, your primary research could include conducting surveys, interviews, questionnaires, among other qualitative and quantitative research methods, which we already done in the last lecture. When conducting primary research, you must remain ethical and keep clear records of your data for analysis. So next is interpretate the collected data. So to interpret your findings, you should organize them so the data relates to a certain point of argument. By doing this, what are you doing? You'll be able to see how your data collected supports, disapproves, or influences the research questions or the hypothesis made in the beginning. So your evidence might show something different from your research question and hypothesis suggested, and that's okay. So we have made a hypothesis where we are saying that younger generation uses more acronyms or use social media than the older. So this is the hypothesis. After collecting the data, you understand the evidence that you prove is completely not supporting the hypothesis that you made in the start. You can analyze the data to see what conclusions can be drawn. In other words, explore the data you collected to understand what it means or suggest. Suppose you were investigating the impact of social media on language use. In that case, you might have conducted a range of surveys and questionnaires to gain data on how your participants use luggage via social media. So these surveys and questionnaires are your primary source. You might also have researched that effects of social media on language use using secondary sources such as existing in research papers on subject. So by collating all these collected data, you could pick out patterns across your participants group, such as people using more acronyms such as LOL or BRB when instant messaging. You could then use a secondary research to suggest reason for these patterns and then present the findings. It is finally time to present your findings. So what you do here is you create your final report or presentation on your findings, whether your project is an essay or a visual presentation. You need to carefully consider how to portray your result and conclusion so that they are easy to follow. Think about what you want your reader or audience to understand from research and how the data you collect support this. Make sure your conclusion is decisive and backed up with the appropriate evidence. A good way to ensure you have supported your argument or investigation sufficiently is to use the peel method in each paragraph. That is PEEL. What is peel method? First is point, evidence, explanation, and link. So, first, make the point or state the argument you want to discuss. Next, provide evidence to support your argument or a point. Explain how and why the evidence back up what you are saying. Lastly, provide a link to your next paragraph where you make your next point. An effective way of presenting visual data is the charts and graphs. So, for example, out of 100 participants, 40 said they use more acronyms on social media than when you using other forms of written communication. So, out of 100 people surveyed, 40 said this. That means you have to write that in your written communication form. Next is last, referencing. Referencing and citation are so important in terms of writing the report. You must refer and cite your work correctly and fully. Some standard referencing formats include APA, MLA, Chicago, but you should check whether your researcher or whether your coach or whether your guide uses which one. So referencing is a very vital and essential as it gives credit to the people who have written the secondary resources you used in your research and acknowledges when you have used an idea that is not yours. It is all contextualize your work and shows how extensive your research has been. Finally, referencing will stop you from being pulled up for the plagiarism. We will look more into the research process examples. So now you have a good idea of how research process work. We'll understand the example. So first we studied identifying the research question. How does language use differ between 18 to 26-year-olds and 45 to 60 years old using social media? So there you have identified the research question. Now formulate the hypothesis. So this step will only be necessary for primary research or a scientific research. So younger people are more likely to use social media for communication and are more likely to use short forms languages such as abbreviations and acronyms. Then we have designer research. So research plan for this investigation could be selecting two groups of participants that match the research criteria, gaining their consent to be included in the study. Use qualitative research methods such as interviews to gather on different variables. Consider how to record the data. Example, detailed notes from secondary research and collating questionnaire and survey answers. Collect the required data. Use a range of primary and secondary sources to conduct secondary research and conduct a semi-structured interview to gain primary qualitative data. So record all these data in an organized and meaningful way. Lastly, you have interpret the data. So use your secondary research knowledge to help analyze the result gained from your primary research, and then link your analysis back to your research question and hypothesis, drawing a conclusion that is backed by evidence. Do not forget that you have to back up your research with an evidence, and a thorough investigation should be done. Lastly, as we mentioned, present your findings. So the research could be reported in an essay or turned into a visual presentation using graphic images or the different points where you are saying why we are mentioning that younger generation use more acronyms or more abbreviations than the older generation. So you have to present your findings with all these steps. This research could be reported in an essay or turned into a visual presentation that will help you to further take out all your outcomes or the research properly in front of your presenter.